So, Ravel Unravel is an exhibition I co-curated with the curators of the State Silk Museum in Tbilisi, Georgia. I met Chuka Kaprava, an artist and the museum's current director, during my first visit to Georgia in 2005, just after the Rose Revolution. Since then, we've worked together on several of the 10 curatorial projects I've realized in this post-Soviet country in that time period. Many of these curatorial ventures, including Ravel Unravel, were done in the context of the Artisterium International, which is an annual exhibition that brings artists, curators, and audiences from dozens of countries to Tbilisi, funded by the Ministry of Culture, various embassies, and cultural organizations. Artisterium's main venue is the Tbilisi History Museum, once an active caravanserai along the Great Silk Route, where textile merchants literally parked their camels down below and temporarily opened up pop-up shops in the rooms upstairs. Ravel Unravel occupied one of those rooms. The exhibition and our curatorial platform aimed to explore the dynamic and intimate relationship between words, textile fibers, and the human body, as well as the region's rich textile trade history. The starting point of Ravel Unravel was the intangible spirit of the State Silk Museum, a 19th century wunderkammer located across town from the Artisterium venue. Having once functioned as a scientific center for silk research since its founding in 1887 and throughout the Soviet era, the museum has an expansive collection of silk industry related objects. Still committed to honoring its founding motto of preserve and share, the museum hosts workshops and public events that encourage contemporary artists to engage silk and other textile materials, methods, histories, and ecologies within their work. Sadly, the silk industry is now defunct in Georgia, caused by a devastating silkworm virus in the mid-1900s, and the government has not resuscitated large-scale silk production because of global trade competition, and even the museum nearly shut down when private investors wanted to convert it into a luxury hotel. Thanks to the organized resistance of Chuka and many other textile enthusiasts, this was stopped. But basically, there's no heat in this building, it's cracking, and many of the locals don't realize that it exists. Nonetheless, it continues to catalyze multidisciplinary research on fiber through weaving workshops, artist interventions in their collections, they welcome those, serving as a writing hub, and highlighting Soviet-era histories, as well as experimenting with silkworm cultivation. They do a lot of these kinds of projects, and so they have a following, but it's just not very widely known. So our collective goal in co-curating this together was to create an experience within the Artisterium International show that demonstrated how contemporary artists from abroad are in dialogue with the artifacts and the current artistic activities of the Tbilisi State Silk Museum. And we did so on a measly $7,000 total budget. So how to co-create a curatorial platform that inspires both local and international audiences to recognize this overlooked and undervalued institution's extraordinary cultural currency and aesthetic potential. How can a collaborative curatorial project be truly dialogical with all participants teaching and learning from one another? So with these goals in mind, we selected US and Greek artists and then immediately had them meet the local residents, giving talks at Tbilisi's university and inviting faculty and students to participate in the making of the work. We also took a field trip to the countryside to meet local craftswomen, where they showed us their techniques, their felting techniques, and in working with a local NGO, craft NGO, we arranged for these women to come to Tbilisi, where they could see our exhibition and also visit the Silk Museum for the first time, where Adonis Volanakis and I ran a workshop for these women to talk about the narratives that are lodged within their textile traditions and the challenges that they face in their daily lives. So the curatorial platform of Ravel and Unravel, as well as the exhibition itself, was meant to instigate or investigate how personal stories, new and old technologies, and textile histories are intimately intertwined, and how they could be taken apart and then re-envisioned. Jen Bervin's Silk Poem project explores the cultural, scientific, and linguistic and physical complexities of silk. Her research on the history of silk production around the world took her to the State Silk Museum in Tbilisi a year earlier, as well as to Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Working with scientists at Tufts University's Silk Laboratories, cutting-edge research center on liquid silk, she learned about the new technology of liquid silk biosensors that could detect chemical levels when inserted into the human body under the skin. These little films are printed at nanoscale, they're embossed, and the surface receives and transfers biomedical data. So working alongside the scientists, Bervin was able to persuade them to, instead of having a Tufts logo embedded on this thing, to put a poem on it instead. So she basically wrote this poem from the point of view of the silkworm, who was pondering its own life cycle, transformation, and mortality. Bervin's poem, literally, its layout mimics the silkworm's back and forth head motions. It goes like this as it spins its cocoon, which you see marked there on the top left, as well as the silk's 6-character DNA structure. And so if the future promises to use silk to help our bodies heal, why not embed those strands with poetry that is unique and meaningful? Bervin's project suggests how new technologies, poetics, and a heightened consciousness of the non-human world may actually help restore an individual's well-being. She reminds us that to understand our own natural rhythms and life cycle, we must learn to see on a more intimate scale. So in the show, the silk poem was exhibited alongside a video mapping Jen's entire research project, which of course featured her discoveries in the Tbilisi Silk Museum. And it was also shown in dialogue with artifacts from the Silk Museum, including deceased silkworms and extinct butterfly species. We also hosted a day-long poetry translation workshop at the Silk Museum, where Bervin's silk poem was cut into sections and then translated into Georgian by members of the local literary and textile communities. So I have that here. And working at the speed of light, our graduate student from Fine Arts, R.P. Adamnan, quickly turned this thing into a chapbook that was available at the exhibition so people could take the Silk Museum, or the Silk poem home with them. As many of you know, Parsons Fine Arts professors Aziz and Kucher are a collaborative duo who have cultural and familial roots in politically opposing Middle Eastern countries. Anthony's family is from Lebanon, Sammy's from Israel, and their recent projects, Textile and Nature, aim to translate the barrage of violent images emerging from the Arab Jewish conflict zone. So they ask, how do we begin to make sense of the explosive and illogical scenes that the global media circulates daily? Inspired by traditional European tapestry exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum, they recognize that these monumental textiles once functioned as emblems of power and propaganda instruments at precisely the time when the modern world's political and economic structures were first being consolidated. So the artists turned to the Jacquard loom, acknowledged as the world's first computer, to recraft complex photographic images that they compose using Photoshop computer software. Some People, as this series is called, is produced in collaboration with master weavers in Belgium and reflects our current state of paradox and uncertainty. Some details. Their work the woven textures and the intricate textile patterns really resensitize us to the human dimension of the conflict. And the effect is uncanny. It's both familiar and unfamiliar at once. We had their work juxtaposed to the experiments on the jacquard looms that were being done by local artists in Tbilisi in the workshops at the Silk Museum. Then Elena Herzog is another artist who deconstructs and reconstructs carpets, blankets, and other woven textiles to consider aspects of ephemerality, entropy, pleasure, and pain. She's focused on global migrations of culture and technology, and she researches the ways people and materials relocate and transform over time. So wherever she travels, she collects old and new materials and that are gleaned from daily life. And then she turns these into sculptural installations that are kind of visually dynamic mashups that are open to multiple readings. In Tbilisi, Herzog worked with local artists and students to research and source the region's textiles from flea markets, as well as unique geometric patterning that is ubiquitous in the architecture. So her site-specific installation for the Artistarium focused on two converging wooden floor patterns in the exhibition hall, revealing where the previous structures had recently been torn down and others seamlessly erected. So the raveling and the unraveling in this case could be witnessed not only in the fabrics, but also on the ground on which we were standing. So the final artist in the show that I'll talk about is Adonis Volanakis, who is a gay man who grew up in a family of Greek textile artists. His mother was a weaver. His grandmother was a weaver. His mother a wedding dressmaker. And so from a very early age, he was interested in the skills and stories that are fervently passed down within a community of women throughout the generations. So he was an artist in residence on the Greek island of Tinos at a weaving school, and he created this video which captured the sounds and motions of a traditional loom being used. So it starts off with the sound of one loom, and it increasingly includes a symphony over time with more than a dozen weaving machines working. So this was the soundtrack, if you will, to the whole exhibition. He also, at the opening, performed what he called Penelope 2.0 on the Silk Museum's loom, inviting participants to rip apart inverted wedding dresses, transforming them into strips of cloth that then they collectively produced a rug from. So this performative action, which was subversive within the context of a Georgian Christian Orthodox culture that fixates on the gender expectations of a virgin bride, recalled the myth of Oedipus's loyal and cunning wife, who fended off unwanted suitors by weaving relentlessly and then secretly unraveling her textile nightly so that her work could never be completed. So as a whole, fusing fiber materials and immaterial memories, visual patterns, sound, performance, and poetry, Ravel Unravel demonstrated why haptic and multisensory and embodied forms of knowledge are essential for rehumanizing an otherwise speed-obsessed, screen-dominated, and increasingly dangerously nationalistic age. But most importantly, it pointed to the role that the Silk Museum, the Tbilisi Silk Museum, is playing within local cultural discourse and could potentially play in a more international arena. Thank you.